Everybody a heads up about that. There we go. Recording in progress. So we're going to get started because we have a lot of great folks we want you to hear from today. And also we'd love to have some time for Q&A. So welcome to the Southern Wings 101 webinar. Again, please introduce yourself and your organization or agency in the chat. I'm Deb Hahn. I work for the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies as their International Relations Director. And I have the privilege of coordinating Southern Wings as one of my roles for the state fish and wildlife agencies. Today, we have an opportunity for you to learn more about Southern Wings and hear about some of the great work our partners are doing across the hemisphere. You're going to hear from 4 individuals, and then we're going to have some time for Q&A. But please use the chat to ask questions throughout the presentations in case we can't get to them all, and we'll get back to you with answers if for some reason we can't. So the first person you'll hear from is Director Sarah Parker-Polly, who is the 9th Director of Missouri Department of Conservation and the first female director since the agency's inception in 1937. She has served in that role since 2016. She's a native Missourian, has gotten her degrees there, and has worked for a number of agencies and organizations in Missouri. She also, luckily for me, was recently the president of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So I've had that privilege of working with Sarah. You're also going to hear from Craig Thompson, who has worked for Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources for, let's see, over 30 years. And he has been working on a variety of migratory bird conservation and management during that time. Sarah Kendrick, who worked for the Missouri Department of Conservation for over 9 years and coordinated their work on Southern Wings, is now with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a bird biologist in Region 3. And finally, you'll hear from Edwin Juarez, who is from Arizona Game and Fish Department, where he's been for 13 years. Working on the conservation and management of birds, including great work with partners in Mexico and Latin America on annual life cycle conservation for birds. So again, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and agency or organization. Thank you for joining us. We are really excited to spend the next hour with you learning and sharing together. And now I'll turn it over to Director Polly to kick things off. So thank you, Director Polly.
Thanks, Deb. Great to see you. Great to see Sarah and so many of the folks that are online today. And it is certainly my pleasure and privilege just to share a few words here at the beginning of this fantastic, what I know is going to be a fantastic webinar. And I think probably you and Sarah asked me to speak just because the Missouri Department of Conservation does have a relatively long history with full life cycle conservation for migratory birds that really began in our agency with the foresight of our previous ornithologist, Brad Jacobs, and it was certainly continued under the fabulous Sarah Kendrick, who, though we're sad she's left the department, we're excited for the Fish and Wildlife Service. I know she'll continue just to do amazing work there. The Missouri Department of Conservation has invested in and supported Southern Wings since its inception in 2009, and it absolutely continues to strongly support the program on an annual basis. I think we all know on this call that we will not have successful migratory bird conservation if we're not working to curb the threats they face when they're beyond our particular borders. And Southern Wings works for habitat conservation and management and research on stopover sites and the wintering grounds that our migrant breeding birds spend up to 8 months really outside of our states and our borders. And so we know that they need our help. And we know this because this is what we have done for and continue to do for waterfowl conservation. And we know how successful that has been. You think of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in 1918 between Canada and the US, the Waterfowl Breeding Population and Habitat Survey within the US and Canada in 1955, NAWAMP 1986, NACA 1989, fall flights, and more. These are all unprecedented regional and international conservation efforts, and they have worked. By providing tens of millions of dollars and working across the full life cycle of waterfowl, we have brought back populations and we have sustained them quite successfully. Southern Wings then is based on this fall flights model, and it's intended to really replicate the success we've seen on the waterfowl side. We're now really at the same place with many of our bird populations that we were with waterfowl in the end of the 19th century. Birds, we all know, are declining at a rapid pace. Full life cycle conservation must become a consistent pillar of our conservation efforts with breeding habitat creation and protection and management. And if not, we're only working to protect these birds perhaps a third of the year. It's not a successful formula. Southern Wings has projects ready to be implemented and has match for SWIG and PR, and yes, fingers crossed, recovering America's Wildlife Act. Do I hear a heck yes? RAWA, in fact, may provide us with an amazing opportunity to contribute even more to Southern Wings. And we here at the Missouri Department of Conservation, as we have worked on our RAWA Ready plan, absolutely have an increase in Southern Wings funding planned when RAWA passes. But protection and conservation of stopover sites and the wintering grounds are basic conservation needs for these species. Many of them which need our help now more than ever. So I say, let's get it done. Let's get it done. With that, Deb, thanks so much for the opportunity to hopefully rally the group for the rest of the webinar. And I really look forward to listening in for the rest of the time.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Really so glad to have you here. Thank you for giving your time today for this program and also for the conservation of birds and your continued leadership in Missouri on so many efforts. And it's now my privilege to turn it over to Craig Thompson to keep us going here. Craig, you're muted, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Doggone it. Did
Nice.
it again. Thanks, Deb. I appreciate the opportunity to join everyone to present today. I'm happy to have an opportunity to go rah for Southern Wings because it really is a great program. And I'm going to start by providing a high-level overview of bird population trends for migratory birds across North America, highlight the need for full annual cycle conservation, as Director Parker Pauly had indicated, and emphasize the importance of Southern Wings as an effective vehicle for advancing full annual cycle conservation for migratory birds. Well, and now I'm not advancing. There we go. So I believe all of you are aware that we face a significant and growing challenge, and specifically that is the loss of biodiversity globally. And of course, declining bird populations in North America are reflective of that particular phenomenon. Quite simply, birds are disappearing. Rare species are becoming rarer, and even common species are declining, for goodness sake. If we look at what's happened since 1970, based on a seminal paper that was done in 2019, we know in fact that we have lost about 2.9, I would say probably 3 billion birds by now, since that's now several years old. So we're realizing precipitous ongoing declines across all suites of birds in North America, with a single exception being waterfowl. So if we look at bird population indicators in 5 inland habitats, you can see that the birds associated with the large biomes, grasslands, arid lands, eastern forests, and western forests are all in relatively steep continuous decline, with wetlands again being the one exception to that trend. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. The primary driver, of course, of bird population declines is habitat loss. Now, there are a number of other factors that are conspiring to drive population numbers down: window collisions, free-ranging cats and so on. But nowhere is there anything greater than habitat loss as relates to being the primary consideration for actually suppressing bird numbers, not only in North America, but in South America as well. And nowhere are we more concerned about habitat loss than in South America. So let's take a look at the wood thrush as a good example. This formerly common species has declined by more than 50% since 1966. And you can see on this lovely map from Cornell that it's a species that's widespread throughout Eastern North America. And its wintering range, depicted in blue down in Central America, is in a relatively restricted geographic area. So you take an entire continental population and you have them concentrated, highly concentrated from southern Mexico down through basically northern Costa Rica. And so what happens to those Caribbean slope forests, and this bird is strongly associated with Caribbean slope forests, what happens there land use wise has a tremendous impact on wood thrushes. And you can see that what's going on in Nicaragua then is relevant for our efforts to maintain wood thrush populations here in North America. In 1983, Nicaragua was largely forested. By 2000, a significant amount of forest had been lost. And of course, the forecast for 2050 is not rosy. And you can see that wood thrushes are returning to Nicaragua, but being pushed into ever diminishing habitats. And that's true not only for wood thrushes, but for a host of other species that are considered to be Caribbean slope associates, including Kentucky warbler, blue-winged warbler, chestnut-sided warbler, least flycatcher, and so on. So as this Caribbean slope forest goes, so go these birds. Further south, got another example, the yellow-billed cuckoo, which is truly a long-distance migrant, annually traveling thousands of miles between breeding grounds in North America and its wintering grounds in South America. The red circle depicts an area, a biome as it were, that's known as the Gran Chaco, which is the most extensive area of dry forest in South America. It's a biome second in size only to the Amazon, and in fact, immediately south of the Amazon. Yellow-billed cuckoos have declined 35% since 1966. And the Western population, the decline has been so precipitous that the bird is actually listed as federally threatened in 2014. This is a species that is entirely dependent on wintering habitat, the Gran Chaco. And it's a biome that unfortunately is being rapidly cleared for soybean culture and for cattle production. If we take a look at what's happened between December 18th, 2000 and December 24th, 2019 in the Salta and Chaco provinces of Northeast Argentina, you can see the widespread deforestation. That is impacting cuckoo populations. And it's not only impacting cuckoo populations, but there are a host of other species, Mississippi kites, common nighthawks, eastern kingbirds, bank, barn, and cliff swallows all depend on Gran Chaco habitats for overwinter survival. And so what happens in Central America, what happens in South America land use wise, has a profound impact on our ability to conserve these birds during their annual cycles. So our response then is clear. We need to address full annual cycle conservation. We need to not only continue our efforts on breeding grounds, but we need to bolster and accelerate efforts to protect wintering grounds and to protect stopover habitats in Latin America. The waterfowl community realized early on, as Director Parker Pauly had indicated, that full annual cycle conservation is in fact key to sustaining viable populations of birds long-term. They invest heavily on projects in Canada and Mexico, and of course throughout the United States. And it's had an impact. And that's one of the reasons we see the trend line for populations of birds associated with wetlands, with that wetland biome going up, whereas all other trend lines for all other guilds of birds are trending downward. Full annual cycle conservation works, and it needs to be something that we embrace and implement in order to get down to the brass tacks of protecting migratory bird populations. Southern Wings does just that. And here's the mission: to encourage and facilitate state wildlife participation in conservation projects for shared priority birds from Mexico down through South America and including the Caribbean. Why participate? Because it makes great sense to do so. And in fact, it's imperative that we all begin to support and implement full annual cycle conservation. We know many species, not all, but many species are winter limited. And from a practical standpoint, what that means is it doesn't matter how much we invest in protecting breeding habitats, be it land protection, be it habitat restoration. It doesn't matter what we do if for a winter limited species, we're not also working on the wintering grounds in Latin America, because if there are no lowland Caribbean slope forests, if there are no mid-elevation forests in Costa Rica, if there are no mid-elevation forests in northwestern South America, then those species reliant on those habitat types are quite simply going to disappear. So now full annual cycle conservation is in fact something that we must be doing. Southern Wings also provides the ability to complement in-state investments for species of greatest conservation need. We know that partners, in-country partners in Latin America, have the ability to leverage our state investments at a minimum of 1-to-1, sometimes greater. And strictly from a regulatory standpoint, full annual cycle conservation helps prevent federal listing by ensuring that there is adequate habitat on both ends of these species hemispheric ranges. Since 2009, 40 states have contributed more than $3,500, more than $3,500,000 for 24 projects in 11 countries. It really is an impactful program. And quite honestly, if Southern Wings wasn't here, if we didn't have Southern Wings as a connection and a conduit to these really important projects in Latin America, I'd be hard pressed to identify ways to facilitate transfer of funds down to those projects to enable in-country partners to work on behalf of our migratory birds. So Southern Wings really is having an impact in terms of advancing the conservation frontier for long-distance migrants. This is a graphic depiction of states that are participating, the dark blue states participating individually. There are also states that are participating as groups through their AFWA associations, and there are some states that are participating both as groups and individually. We're really happy to know that 40 states are participating. It's been critically important for the future of birds. And in fact, we know that if we can get more states to participate, if we can encourage those that for whatever reason have not been able to do so, to in fact join the growing cadre of Southern Wing supporters, we're really going to be able to make a difference for birds. So the bottom line is it's crunch time. We have a closing window of opportunity within which to make a difference. Every global biodiversity assessment that has recently come out has indicated this is the decisive decade for the future of nature. So we are literally on the front lines. And Southern Wings provides a powerful, effective tool for us to advance the conservation of migratory birds. For those of you who have been supporting Southern Wings, thank you. For those of you who are considering it, we hope you join us to ensure a future for migratory birds. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. That really set things up, was inspirational. Thank you so much. So at this point, I'm going to just share my, I'm going to just head it over to Sarah Kendrick from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who is our next presenter. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks everybody for having me. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about MDC's experience with Southern Wings, the Missouri Department of Conservation. So here in Missouri, as Sarah talked about, we have a neat legacy with full life cycle conservation that began with MDC's former ornithologist, Brad Jacobs. So Brad was a big part of developing the concept of Southern Wings, and I was at MDC as an ornithologist after him for 5 years and carried this torch and grew Southern Wings. So the trust and willingness of MDC administration to take up this mantle back in 2008 is very admirable, as was their efforts to educate others and push for it to become a program that we see today. And today, MDC administration continues to trust MDC staff. They're willing to be educated on the topic, to see the program's value to our breeding birds, and continue to not only support Southern Wings, but to grow contributions to it annually. So this program requires education and advocacy to keep it going. Supporting this work requires constant attention. It requires education on the topic, stories from the field, and reporting. And Southern Wings provides all of that in spades. Here we see the project proposals that Deb sends out every single year. Those are updated annually by project partners in country. So you see here the cover and the table of contents. You also see the number of countries that are covered in all of these active projects. As everyone mentioned, these are RAWA ready projects that are vetted projects with strong partnerships that are ready to go and ready for funding with these project proposals already outlined. So how did MDC choose these locations? Where they invested? Well, through other partnerships like Partners in Flight, which is a group of groups working for full life cycle conservation across the hemisphere. In 2006, they created these maps for all states. You see Missouri there in yellow, to identify locations where we get the biggest bang for our conservation buck by overlaying the wintering locations of our priority bird species. But now, with the mass amounts of data submitted by birders across the globe on eBird, we're working with eBird scientists to generate new and improved maps with data through 2020 to further home in on areas where our work is most effective on the non-breeding grounds of priority species. So all of this is based in lots of data and science. So here you see an eBird map generated for just the 17 migratory species in our Missouri Bird Conservation Plan. So these maps are due out for all states from eBird on September 14th. We've worked with eBird and Cornell Center for Avian Population Studies to create these maps for each state with relevant SGCNs from your swaps or from regional SGCN lists that were made by AFWA groups for all states. So stay tuned for that. So when we zoom in on the sites that are that have the strongest strength of breeding connection, you see with the dark purple, we see that targeted work for Missouri's priority birds include Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Colombia, Ecuador, and luckily that's where we've been working. So here are some of the activities that are in the Southern Wings projects that MDC has supported. They include slowing deforestation, reforestation, and further habitat management, setting up tree nurseries to help local folks plant those trees, land acquisition and protection, education of landowners on sustainable ag and ranching practices, education of locals to build up that pride and protection of these resources around them that they may not know is around, trainings, monitoring, banding, and the list goes on. And these are the countries that MDC has supported projects in. The yellow ones are from FY20. So then when you check out the Southern Wings project proposals document each year, each proposal includes the following information. It includes partners, states that have participated in the past on this project, an overview of the project, of course, threats that these birds face in this area and in the country, birds that benefit from this project that have been monitored and counted on these sites, goals of the project, previous Southern Wings successes, conservation actions, and then maps and supplemental materials that help to further show the importance of these efforts. So each year we're provided then 2 reports at mid-year and end of year that talk about how the project is going. This is the project report for our Colombian Southern Wings project, which is improving migratory bird habitat in coffee farms in Colombia. Coffee is one production system that Southern Wings helps to make more sustainable and better for wildlife via education of landowners, ranchers, and ag producers. So before I jump into coffee, I want to talk about what these project reports include. They include states that have been involved in the amounts of money, so we know we're not alone in these efforts. Project partners, goals, and activities that the project has conducted, progress of those activities, photos, even difficulties encountered. You can imagine COVID-19 slowed down some of the efforts on these projects, but they have continued to go and adapt and change around the projects as needed in the face of that global pandemic, and then next steps and funding needs. So bird-friendly coffee is one area of focus for these ag efforts to educate landowners, ranchers, and these producers. So bird-friendly coffee is coffee grown in the shade of a native overstory that provides a better, higher quality, better tasting coffee, and it's better for our migratory birds for foraging habitat when they're beyond our borders. You can see here how our priority areas for full life cycle conservation directly overlap with the areas in the world where our coffee is grown. So bird-friendly coffee with a native canopy overhead is more beneficial to a broad suite of wildlife because tropical forest isn't being cleared to grow sun coffee, which you see here in this picture. And it tastes better for us, selfishly. Coffee was traditionally grown in shade that you see here. It provides a higher quality, again, better tasting coffee that supports up to 243 bird species as opposed to 60 species that are supported by these monocultures of sun coffee. So landowner education on these bird-friendly practices are part of some Southern Wings projects, conducting landowner workshops, tree planting, setting up tree nurseries to do this reforestation efforts, and education of children and locals. So these Southern Wings reports also include photos of real projects on the ground. On the left, you see photos of Mujeres Cafeteras, or Women Coffee Growers, a local group that oversees 3 tree nurseries for reforestation efforts. To date, this project has replanted over 58,000 trees of 139 native tree species on 218 farms, working toward reforestation of about 230 hectares. And these trees grow quickly. It's not like temperate landscapes that most of us live in. They're growing 1 to 2 meters every few months. It's not like temperate zones. So reforestation is possible, and it's much quicker down here in the Neotropics. Here we see a few photos of education of children and locals, which is clearly imperative for generations moving forward to have that buy-in, pride, and learn the importance of these birds on the landscape. Here we see a photo of the Santa Marta Mountains in Colombia, a key stopover tropical forested habitat. But we see this land use change on the mountainsides, removal of this essential tropical forest for pasture and also commodity crops. Other project activities, just on this Colombian project, this is just one project still, includes migratory bird monitoring. Of course, we need to monitor how the species are reacting and benefiting from this work, and some other efforts here that you see listed. Local economies and livelihoods and conservation must be intertwined in this work in the Neotropics. Similar to here in the States, we can't ask partners to do conservation work just out of the goodness of their hearts. It has to be tied in with economics and how they make their livings. Other Southern Wings support from MDC have supported training programs for up-and-coming bird biologists, for bird banding, for processing, and for data analysis, which again is very important in building up these partnerships and biologists in the future. This is from the Southern Wings proposal for work in Nicaragua and Honduras. Each proposal includes birds that benefit, a list of species that have been monitored and documented on these sites that will benefit from this work. So you can tailor each of these projects for your states. Here I've just bolded the birds that breed in Missouri, but clearly we're assisting all of these other species listed here because all of these birds also pass through Missouri during migration, which is another key part of the full annual cycle that we cannot overlook that these birds need throughout the year. Another big project that MDC has supported for the last 4 or 5 years is the Neotropical Flyways project. So this is standardized bird surveys with this project across 6 Latin American countries over the last 6 years during spring and fall migration to identify key stopover sites that migratory birds are using to target then habitat conservation actions. So this is the first standardized data gathering in a project this large across this big of a geography that many migrants are using on their journeys north and south. So Selva, a Colombian nonprofit, coordinates these surveys with local professionals across all of these countries, empowering and growing that Latin American conservation professional base, which is so important as we move forward into the future. Here's the Neotropical Flyways project network of biologists by country. All of these individuals receive not just training and survey techniques and bird ID, but also in migratory ecology and the threats that these birds face. The Neotropical Flyways project leads to targeted bird banding and then monitoring efforts once they have identified these key hotspots, and then these targeted field projects and technology to learn more about birds moving through these countries, how long they're there, where they're located within these countries to then target habitat management. Like this, so a PhD student, Pilar Caicedo at Western University, has compiled key stopover sites you see on the left for a guild of species of interest to identify priority regions by overlaying where they occur in this map. Just so again, we can closely target this work, where to focus our efforts, of course, which we all do at the state level and at regional levels. Or the Neotropical Flyways project data can lead to specific studies on SGCN or SOCCs like the cerulean warbler in Costa Rica. So here we see data collected by the Neotropical Flyways project, and partners Ernesto Carman and Paz Angulo, which you see at the photo on the right, showing peak migration dates for cerulean warblers. So this shows the times of year that they are there. So then again, you can focus efforts. And then specific elevation ranges that cerulean warblers are using as they move through Costa Rica. So these birds, many of these species are not just going down and using any old tropical forest to forage in. they're using a specific band of elevation along these mountainsides, which further limits their habitat use when they're on the wintering grounds, but it also helps further target our work to work in those sites. Like this, to do targeted research using modus tracking on cerulean warblers to determine how long these birds are staying at these stopover sites. Some for over a week, fattening up at these key essential sites before continuing migration. They're not just moving along any old forest, kind of at the same pace throughout the entire region. Some of these key stopover sites are essential for these birds' survival because they're using the same areas moving through. So this research can help determine that. And then again, from this exact research, they're growing landowner outreach, awareness, and setting up a native tree nursery nearby and reforestation efforts exactly in the spot where cerulean warblers are greatest. All targeted conservation on these areas that ceruleans are using the most as they migrate through. So thank you for your attention. Now I'll turn it over to Edwin Juarez in Arizona to talk about efforts that he's been overseeing with Arizona Game and Fish.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, my screen showing well right now.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everyone again. I'm just gonna wrap up our presentations with 3 examples from how Arizona has been participating in Southern Wings. Arizona Game and Fish has a long history of international collaborations on wildlife conservation, particularly with partners in Mexico. And when Southern Wings got started, we have been participating since the beginning. And so today I'm going to briefly talk about 2 different ways that we have been participating in Southern Wings. One is through the Pacific Flyway Council, and another one is individually Arizona developing our own priority projects with partners in Mexico and Central America. So I'm briefly going to describe some of those projects. Just to kind of set the framework, in Arizona we have about 550 species that have been documented in the state. About 230 of those are migratory, whether they breed in Arizona, or they winter in Arizona, or they spend the winters in Mexico, Central America, or further south. And out of these, about 140 or so species are SGCN species. So our Southern Wings projects are obviously focused on targeting this priority species, and our participation has been through either the Flyway Council or directly with the partners. And one of the projects that we have been participating through the Flyway is this project that has been active for several years now, which is identifying threats and conservation hotspots in Northwest Mexico, really focusing on improving the efficiency of conservation and management of key wetland coastal areas where a lot of our wintering migratory species or shorebirds, waterbirds, and waterfowls spend in Northwest Mexico. And the focus here is to gather solid survey data across 21 sites in Northwest Mexico and use this data to drive conservation in the region. Partners with NGO partners, or also in close collaboration with Mexico's Park Service, the one that manages the protected areas in Mexico, and then share this information with those managers, and also engage in education outreach activities in those local communities that live within or adjacent to this designated protected areas. So this just to kind of show the geography of where we're working with partners in the region to do this work. In 2022, here we're mentioning some examples of the kind of activities that Flyway is supporting through this Southern Wings projects. We're working with local hunting organizations to improve management of their areas, more sustainable harvesting of waterfowl, and also improving habitats in those areas. We're also developing working with an irrigation district to maintain habitat along the canal drainages for loafing areas for waterfowl, and also maintaining and putting in interpretive trails in protected areas. Another key component has been our partners have developed conservation agreements with the municipalities to ensure that key wintering areas for this waterfowl and shorebird species or more effectively protected, so that they're zoned to where certain areas have allow low human activities in some of those areas. So the data that we're collecting through the surveys is being applied directly on the ground to this kind of activities. And so states within the Flyway participate through our voluntary assessment. And so those funds are then directly sent to the partner doing the work in the region. Another project, it's a fairly new project that Arizona initiated, and then more recently the Flyway has been participating as a group, has been working to conserve tropical deciduous forests in El Salvador, protecting overwintering or migrating habitat. Tropical deciduous forests in the Pacific coast of Central America are highly impacted. They're being lost due to conversion to agriculture or to pasture lands, and also wildfires. In El Salvador, about over 300 species of birds have been documented using this habitat, and also about 38 SGCN species from multiple states across the West are using this habitat. And so we are focusing on conserving this habitat, working with our partner Paso Pacifico, and also in partnership with the Ministry of Environment in El Salvador to conserve this habitat for birds. And so one of the unique opportunities in El Salvador is that a lot of this habitat was fairly protected during a long civil war. So there's fairly intact habitats in the coastal areas of El Salvador. So it presents a unique opportunity to continue to maintain and improve these areas of tropical deciduous forests for migratory bird resident species. So some of the activities that we're supporting through this project is training community rangers to monitor the protected areas, implementing bird surveys, and developing capacity for volunteers and birders to conduct bird surveys within the areas. Our partners are also working to identify new areas that may be available for designations as protected areas. We're also, I think, a couple of really cool things is that we're working directly with the Ministry of the Environment to we developed a best management guidelines for bird watching as an ecotourism tool. That's the first time that's been done in El Salvador. We're also working with the ministry to develop a national bird conservation strategy, looking at other examples in South America where this has been done. And also another key component is really building the capacity, the institutional capacity of small NGOs that have been doing small conservation activities, but really looking to ramp those activities up, to supporting global big day events, encouraging and promoting birding clubs, and also bringing education, outreach education to local communities within this tropical deciduous forest habitats. We're also working to implement a small, a tiny grants program that would facilitate university students. University students in El Salvador are required to do a special project as part of their graduation, and so this small grants program would allow them to study or develop bird research projects. And so again, really focusing on building that capacity in country to continue to do this kind of work in partnership with the Flyway and other states. And another project which Arizona has been involved for a long time is really looking to conserve old growth forests in this Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico, and Durango and Chihuahua and Durango. Our initial interest has been conserving thick-billed parrot habitat. This is a species that used to occur in southeastern Arizona in the Sky Islands, and it has been extirpated from Arizona for many years now. And so we have been long interested in conserving the species where it now occurs, which is in that pink and blue areas that you see on the map here. But really, the species is a driver to conserve this old growth forest habitats, which is what the species needs, where they breed and where they feed. And so our partners, Ovis, Organización Vida Silvestre, and previously Pro Natura, have been actively working in the region, one, to manage and conserve the population of species, but equally important to conserve this mixed conifer forest habitats, which provide habitat for migratory species, many of our migratory species from Arizona and other states. And that includes working with partners to integrate wildlife values, wildlife needs into the forest management plans. Each landowner in Mexico is required to have a forest management plan in place before they can do timber harvesting. But working with the forestry folks, our partners have integrated key habitat needs for thick-billed parrots and other species into the forestry management plan, so that there's a more sustainable forestry program, and also doing a lot of monitoring of migratory birds and also thick-billed parrots activities. And we're learning a lot about the species. We recently discovered that one of the mysteries was where the thick-billed parrots were migrating for the winter. They breed in Chihuahua, and they spend the winters further south. And so this kinds of collaborations has allowed us to identify key wintering areas for thick-billed parrots. So we're working with our partners to identify where there's opportunities for conservation, where are the gaps in protected areas. And again, not just benefiting the parrots, but also migratory species that they use, that occur all along this the Sierra Madre Occidental, either for overwintering or for migrating through. Another more recent project that we've developed for Arizona is Yuma Retrous Rail. It's an Arizona SGCN. It's also a federally listed rail. And up to recently, it was not known that the species was migratory. We assumed that it was non-migratory, but recent research indicates that over 40% of the populations were actually migrating south into Sonora and Sinaloa, into those wetland areas from where they breed in Arizona. And this map kind of shows those migratory patterns. And so again, as information becomes available and as we continue to work with local partners, obviously we identify needs to develop new projects. And so this is a new project that we have where we're working with the local partners to first obtain monitoring data for the species in their wintering areas, and just learn more about their habitat use in those two Mexican states, and also look for opportunities in needs in terms of habitat conservation so that we can maintain this habitats for what we now know as a migratory species. Another project that we're looking into is, Craig talked about the yellow-billed cuckoo and the fact that the species is overwintering in the Gran Chaco in South America, a habitat that is highly threatened. And so we're looking for opportunities to perhaps develop a Southern Wings project that really links states that have cuckoo species or other migratory species that are using this habitat, and looking for identifying the partners and opportunities to work in this region in South America to begin addressing threats to the species in the wintering grounds. So I think that's it. Deb, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Edwin. That was great. Thank you, Sarah, Director Polly, Edwin, and Craig. Really amazing stuff. I'm going to just share my screen for a second before we go into Q&A. And I'll ask at this point, if you have some questions, I've already gotten a couple, but that you share them in the chat. And what I wanted to do was just quickly do a summary of some of the main points that our speakers highlighted. One, that Southern Wings is an easy, transparent, flexible process. There are a host of funding options that states use, whether that's SWIG or PR, other taxes, license fees, etc. There are also a variety of mechanisms that you saw in there where folks move money. We have flyway councils like the Pacific and the Missouri that move funds. We have folks like Arizona who work directly with partners on the ground, moving money through regional associations or even joint ventures. They mentioned leveraging limited state funds, providing non-federal match, SWIG, PR, and again, hopefully RAWA. We have some amazing partners on the ground, and as much as we get the states participating in this, I mean, these other partners are critical and they are amazing, strong, they do great work. And the other thing I think I'll emphasize is that it really is strategic conservation, that we continue to learn more and more about where these birds go, whether it's through eBird, work Audubon is doing, the Migratory Connectivity Project. And so we're making better choices of how to use these funds to make a difference for these species. So again, annual life cycle conservation, it's critical. So I'm going to stop sharing there and turn it over to Sarah to lead Q&A. Sarah, I do have a couple questions if we don't get any questions, additional questions in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead, everybody. Thanks, Deb, and put your questions in the chat. I don't see any, so if you have others right now that you want to ask. And
yeah, I think there was a question about kind of the connection between swaps and southern wings. And I think what I'll just share, and Sarah and Edwin and Craig, you may have other thoughts, is that there is a huge connection there. And the Southern Wings Technical Committee that includes state Fish and Wildlife Agency members has developed a template for the swaps where you can use some template language and some and a table of species to try to integrate full life cycle conservation into your update of the state wildlife action plans. That'll be happening for most states in October 2025. And you can reach out to me or any of these folks to get more information on that. But it is an important piece to have some of this integrated into the state wildlife action plans. So I'll just say that to that one, Sarah. I do see some things came in the chat and I'll turn it back over to you.
yeah, I'll just make another comment on that question about swaps and how it ties in. So I showed you that eBird map that's generated from lots of great eBird models. And I mentioned those will be ready for states in mid-September. So those will be built with whatever priority lists states deem worthy. So eBird has presented to the Wildlife Diversity Program Managers group through AFWA to present on what they can provide, which is connections of priority species to overwintering grounds, but also a map showing uniqueness, which is how unique your state's breeding birds are, your priority birds are to some of the wintering grounds to, again, further home in on where you can get the biggest bang for your buck in this work. So I just mentioned that they have worked off of SGCN lists and swaps and also RSGCN lists where they have them when they don't have the swap list. So we are in touch with states on those topics. So Chris from Minnesota DNR says, since habitat destruction is the primary cause of bird declines and winter habitat is limiting, can you summarize Southern Wings strategy and primary efforts to prevent habitat destruction in bird wintering grounds? Does funding from states go toward purchasing wintering habitat outright or some form of conservation easement? I have my thoughts on that on projects we've provided money for, but Deb, do you want to talk about the bigger picture there?
Yeah, I'll just mention it's a great question, and certainly it really depends on the country and the area where you're working, right? So some of the folks in their presentations mentioned shade-grown coffee. That is one way to reduce habitat destruction. We also have folks who do conservation easements, if you will, 10 to 20 years that work with, say, ranchers in the grasslands of northern Mexico and working with ejidos, communities in northern Mexico, to work on long-term conservation plans. We have had states that are also comfortable with providing funds to in-country NGOs to purchase wintering ground habitat. So there are a lot of different approaches, and it really depends on the area, the habitat, and the specifics on the ground to make those decisions on how to address habitat destruction.
Yeah, I think one of the first steps is identifying which countries, which areas of the neotropics make sense for your breeding birds that you want to help prioritize. And then from there, I mean, working with Deb and our partners at American Bird Conservancy, plus a ton of other local partners on the ground in country, you can figure out something that fits for your state. If you're interested in land protection or acquisition, I think that's always an option in some countries where some of that groundwork has been laid, or a lot of these reforestation efforts are already working to kind of turn the tide of the deforestation, but there's a lot of different approaches. Craig, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. It depends on the country. It depends on the capacity of the partners in country as it relates to their ability to protect land in various forms. One of the things we're bumping up against is the hard reality of actually having to just try to hang on to protected areas. And so, for instance, the Southern Wings community has been involved in discussions with other conservation organizations that are currently active in Latin America, one being the Wildlife Conservation Society based in New York. And the Wildlife Conservation Society has taken a position that they are, based on what's going on, based on the significance of the threat, they are simply working with local units of government, national governments, and indigenous governments to try to hang on to the existing protected areas that exist without even trying to establish new protected areas. The situation is that dire in certain countries. But that doesn't preclude, as Sarah had indicated, the ability for us to establish new protected areas, which I believe are important and I believe that is also going to happen. And then, there's also habitat rehabilitation through restoration that's critically important as well, and that can happen in a variety of ways. So this conundrum of habitat loss in Latin America is being addressed, but it needs to be tailored to each individual situation, depending on where you're working and who you're working with.
Yes, Sarah, and I did want to mention, I forgot, we also, in a lot of countries, right now I was thinking of Honduras, where the project partners have helped local landowners become private reserves, right? And then they get some government benefit from that for preserving those lands. And we also in some of the partners we work with, look at things like watershed protection and other goals and objectives that fit into the larger picture of bird conservation and habitat. And then when it comes to protected areas, there is a lot of folks now who are not doing traditional protected areas, right? They're working with local communities. They have buffer zones. They have areas where they do agroforestry, et cetera. So there are a lot of options and ideas out there, and a lot of creative partners.
There are other issues where if you acquire land, you need to also hire law enforcement folks to monitor those lands to make sure sometimes just protections isn't enough. And so all of those pieces, it's always a broad and bigger story, but there's a lot of really good opportunities to help them there. I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah, I just wanted to add it. And I think the beauty of Southern Wings is that it plants the seed of bird conservation at a local level, and that can grow into really profound things from a conservation standpoint. So it gets the conversation started. It convenes the people who have interest in bird conservation. It brings badly needed resources to those efforts, and if given the right mix of resources and partners, it can really flourish and grow into something quite spectacular and meaningful from a bird conservation standpoint.
I agree. The partners down there are so very passionate and working so hard. They have such different challenges than we do, and it's just so fulfilling to really help them do their work. I have a question. Deb, we don't have projects currently, Southern Wings projects in Brazil, do we? But can you talk about the current state of opportunities and needs there?
Yeah, I'm definitely not the expert on that. We have not worked in Brazil. Certainly there have been federal government changes in Brazil that have created a lot of challenges for local conservation, but also opportunities. I know there's some great shoreward work going on with some of their national plans, even though Southern Wings isn't directly involved. But Darren, we can probably find some folks that can better answer that question for you and get back to you on that.
Definitely. Eileen asks, has anyone run into any concerns or difficulties either internally or with Fish and Wildlife Service in using Southern Wings as a match for state wildlife grants funding?
Yeah, great question, Eileen. And I think, one of the things we find with state wildlife grants is it's implemented in different ways across the states. And so there's some states that have found it extremely easy to use those funds and it's seamless. And then there, other states that have, I don't know if difficulties, but certainly have had run into challenges. California, who is working on some marsh bird conservation work, ended up using state wildlife grant funds, but it probably took them 2 or 3 years to really figure out the way to do that within their system. And so there are some challenges. We have yet to have any challenges on that Fish and Wildlife Service, to my knowledge, has questioned the use of those funds and the projects as long as they work within the state wildlife grant process within a state. But it may be that I haven't heard of some of those, but I don't have any examples to share on that right now.
Okay, thanks, Eileen, for that question. Guy Folks, who runs our Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act funding, asks, is there any ballpark on how much funding could be funneled to Southern Wings as a result of RAWA? I don't know that we have an answer for this because I don't know if there's, and Sarah, please chime in if you know differently, or I know that Megan Buchanan is running that for Missouri at the department, but I think it depends on each state, how much match they would be able to provide, right, of how much money would be funneled to the state, period, much less how much they want to allocate to Southern Wings. Yes.
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes,
Sarah,
that's right. I think it's really up to at each individual state and how much match you think you can provide. So it is, as I mentioned early on, it's certainly something that we have included in our RAWA ready plan.
And I'll just add that convening this group and many other of our AFWA committees, once RAWA passes, to potentially develop some sort of comprehensive plan for how we could all contribute to Southern Wings to make sure that we're doing a good coverage of their projects, that we're not overloading them, but meeting their needs. I think a comprehensive approach where all of us states got together to discuss could be something we definitely do as well.
I agree, Megan. And some of that infrastructure is already set up because some states already contribute to the Flyway and through other groups. So, all right, thank you both. What other questions do we have? I think, what, if any, known at this point, opportunities might exist focused on monarch conservation? If those conservation opportunities were available, would Southern Wings be an appropriate pathway?
So I am going to answer that question for Chris, but right above him, Janet asked a question, curious as to why several southern states are not participating in Southern Wings. And
good question, Janet.
I'll just share an overarching statement that when we did a survey of states, it was probably a year and a half ago now, asking what were the challenges and limitations to participation. And the largest one, as you might be able to guess, was financial. Of where do we get the funds and how do we not use all of our funds to work within our state, right? So financial limitations. There were also limitations of just getting approvals from commissions and other things, depending again on how the state works. And we even at one point, I remember years ago working with Carol Henderson in Minnesota, and they weren't allowed to send money outside the country. So they actually went through a legislative change. So there are a number of different reasons, and it's fairly state specific. So I see we are at 2 o'clock, but Chris, I did want to answer your question. I know we have talked about this and I have reached out to the Monarch folks in the past, and I think there is an opportunity for that. Obviously, we have the process and the framework to be able to do that. I think it's just figuring out whether there is, I think when we talk to some of the states, I think there wasn't, I guess we didn't get consensus that they were ready to send money to Mexico for monarch conservation. But we should probably continue that conversation. And if there are those opportunities, certainly provide support for conservation of monarchs if and when we can.
Okay, Deb, I don't see any other questions and I don't want to go over the hour. So
Yes.
thanks everybody for attending.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Director Polly, thank you for spending the hour with us. Thank you to our presenters. Appreciated all your participation. We will be sending an email out with the recording and with some additional information to everyone who participated and the other folks that we shared this with, and those who have gotten in touch with me that they weren't able to attend today but wanted to hear the webinar. So have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thanks all
everybody.
for your time.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.